Quindi consegniamo il premio, Giannozzo Pucci consegna il premio simbolico a David Holmgren, scusate. Giannozzo, mettiti qui se no non ti vedo.
Hello, David. I think we met in Florence a couple of times. You were here at the Firucola, I think, sometimes. And
Yes.
so I'm honored to give you this prize because you are giving, and you have given a lot of contribution to what I feel is the top of civilization, is how our society and how human beings can manage to become symbiotic with environment and with nature. That is the best work that we can do in our life, which normally now society is doing exactly the opposite, but this is our aim, and I think everyone who has given a contribution to this, and you have given a lot of it, has to be considered an example to follow. So this is, I just give it symbolically, but I hope you will come to Florence one day or other, anyway, to take it directly.
Devi far vedere alla camera del...
There it is. There it is.
Thank you. I'm honored to have Giornata Pucci present the Monito del Giardino Award to me by Skype because I have fond memories and lasting influences from our brief time together in Firenze back in 1994. I would like to give congratulations to the other award recipients, especially Jane Goodall for her primate conservation work. And lastly, I am very excited by this year's theme, the power of trees, as a subject that is close to my heart and my life's work with permaculture. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. We'll see your presentation, and we'll enjoy it, I'm sure. So, David Holmgren, now here.
The power of trees in the energy descent future. I come from Hepburn Springs, a village 120 kilometres inland from Melbourne, Australia's second largest city. On our small farm, Meliadora, we provide most of our own energy and food using permaculture design and methods. Meliadora is a food forest that provides a diverse and complex habitat for birds, animals and people. Permaculture is also my life's work, which I teach others about locally and globally by example, lectures such as this one, books, tours and courses. Permaculture is a design system for sustainable living and land use. Its conceptual origins in Australia coincided with the first modern wave of environmental solutions, stimulated by the oil crises of 1973 and 1979. Over more than 3 decades, permaculture designers, teachers and activists have spread the ideas around the world to an extent that permaculture has, in Australia, now only a small part of the global activity. In Australia, permaculture has been a conceptual influence on many of today's mainstream environmental solutions, from land care to school gardens, from passive solar design to compost toilets, from ethical investment to farmers' markets. From the beginning, trees have been central to the permaculture concept and vision of humanity living by an enduring and harmonious use of natural resources. As the dominant climax vegetation over vast areas of the planet, forest trees are the longest lived and largest perennial species that give structure, diversity, productivity and resilience to terrestrial ecosystems. Before fossil-fuelled industrial culture, mature forests represented real wealth that sustained both local agrarian communities and nation states. In the energy descent future that will characterise the downslope from Hubbard's peak of oil production, the rebuilding of these stocks of natural wealth will determine the well-being of future generations more than any other inheritance we might leave for our descendants. Forests that provide ecological service functions as well as yields of food, fodder, fibre and fuel will again be the primary sources of wealth that money and other measures of value will reference. The theme, the power of trees, can be understood first through the scientific concept of power as work done per unit of time. That trees do work in nature that benefits humanity is undeniable. The simplest measure of that work is accumulated biomass, measured in tonnes per hectare. Fast-growing forests, at their peak, can accumulate more than 2,000 tonnes of wood per hectare. This biomass is our best hope for sequestering carbon dioxide in living biomass, soil humus, biochar and durable wood products. On the other hand, ancient trees, whose growth rate is negligible, represent ecological value of a place. The centuries of sunlight embodied in these oldest of living organisms takes the form of complex ecostructures, strong and durable wood, fruit, and finally seed that represents the ultimate in adaptation to landscape and climate. So as the power flow from photosynthesis declines with age, the quality of that flow increases, as measured by Emergy, Howard Odum's unit of embodied energy that was so influential in the origins and ongoing evolution of permaculture. The power from plants and trees has been massively overshadowed by the power of ancient sunlight embodied in fossil fuels. But over the 21st century, the power of plants and especially trees will again be important factors in shaping how harsh or benign the energy descent future will be. The application of fossil-fueled technology has transformed agriculture, but the productivity gains achieved are now failing, while the destructive side effects are increasing. Reform of annual crop agriculture and intensive animal husbandry to survive the energy descent future remains a massive task. The permaculture perspective is that we need to redesign agriculture on ecological principles. That redesign must include a much greater role for perennials and trees to provide the ecostructures lacking in both annual cropping and intensive livestock husbandry. While fossil fuels, both directly and indirectly, have been the most powerful factor in expanding food production over the last 200 years, the role played by crops transported around the world over the last 500 years has also been important. The story of how corn and potatoes, amongst other crops, transformed old world agriculture is well known, but the role of perennials especially trees, established in new environments, has been slower to emerge. Exotic species predominate in plantations around the world. The vigour, adaptability and productivity of these migrants on poor soils and marginal uplands has been a boon to traditional forestry focused on timber, paper and energy production. In Brazil, for example, growth rates of merchantable wood from eucalyptus plantations are many times greater than that achievable from indigenous species. This power from migrant species should be more widely accepted as an expression of nature's abundance. I believe the real value from timber plantations is not their immediate harvest, but the future potential to generate new mixed forests that will provide multiple yields and ecological services far more effectively than either monocultural plantations or restored indigenous forests. On the other hand, the monoculture of mind that has dominated industrial forestry around the world has given migrant tree species, especially Australian eucalyptus, a bad environmental reputation. The dysfunctions of industrial plantation forestry can be more easily reformed to reflect ecological principles than reformation of industrial agriculture. This difference is very poorly understood. In the late 20th century, environmentalists tended to overstate the damage caused by plantation forestry, while on the other hand accepting annual crop agriculture as relatively benign. Today, migrant trees provide resources that indigenous species can no longer do due to slow growth rates and regeneration or changed environments and climates. Whether it is American robinia fixing nitrogen and providing durable wood and honey yields in Europe and China, Australian eucalyptus in Brazil and many other countries providing strong structural poles of exceptional straightness, or European willows stabilising rivers in New Zealand and Australia. These migrant trees promise to be proportionally more powerful agents in both environmental restoration and humanly useful yields than already overbred annual crops that dominate current land use. The inclusion of trees as a productive element of agricultural landscapes by innovative ecological farmers over the last few decades has been inspired by both traditions from the past and modern ecological concepts such as permaculture and agroforestry. The core of the permaculture concept was the idea of a perennial agriculture, both in the sense of being structured around perennial plants and in being sustainable and enduring, i.e. perennial. In the tropical and subtropical regions of the world, food forests have been models for permaculture and agroforestry concepts. The permaculture vision of food forests replacing annual crop agriculture as the primary source of staple foods in the temperate zones may never be widespread. But I believe forest trees still have huge and largely untapped potential to provide staple foods in the energy descent future. The greatest potential is not from trees that need constant care and replanting, but with species that naturalise to become indigenous to both landscape and culture. Fast-growing pioneer species that yield fibre, fuel, have already shown their potential to naturalise and integrate with indigenous species to generate more novel ecosystems. Species that yield food and fodder tend to be more particular about soil and microclimate and are slow to regenerate and naturalise. For example, in Australia, Northern Hemisphere oaks, Quercus species, remain occasional features of amenity and farm landscapes in temperate southeast of the country. But our study and use of many species of oaks over more than 3 decades has confirmed that many can adapt to erratic Australian climates and nutrient-depleted ancient soils. The growth rates are such that European foresters would find the results incredible. The yields of acorns provide concentrated forage for free-ranging pigs and other animals. We are now seeing vigorous, naturally occurring hybrids that are effectively new species indigenous to Australia. While this naturalisation of oak in Australia has been very slow to become evident, compared with the multi-generational presence of naturalised pines and willows, the potential of oaks to be major elements of future Australian food forests is clear. This is the power of trees, slow to develop but determining in the longer term. On a teaching and study tour of Latin America in 2007, trips to see the legendary Chilean wine palms that bear miniature coconuts in a dry Mediterranean climate, and the snow-covered nut-bearing araucarias at the tree line in the high Andes were for me permaculture pilgrimages to venerate these threatened species that were once abundant in their native lands. While the restoration of these and other forest species to their former glory is an honourable aim of conservation, their potential use in similar climates around the world has barely begun. The novel ecosystems that are already emerging around the world have been a major theme of my study and interest as models for permaculture design. In our own locality in southern Australia, the Spring Creek Community Forest has been an inspiration in what nature can do in less than a century to heal and restore a degraded mining landscape. This is the power of trees. Our modest efforts in managing these novel ecosystems is driven as much by the desire to understand ecological evolution in action as it is to steer that evolution in directions that are beneficial to biodiversity and human utility. From study of this site and many others in Australia and around the world, we've found that exotic trees are the pioneers in ecological and landscape restoration, as well as promising to provide the resources to sustain modest human needs once the fireworks of fossil-fuelled affluence is a fading memory. Because of their power to alter the visual landscape, trees have become the focus of our emotional connection to landscape. When in Toscana in 1994, my comments about the Palestinian pines introduced by the Romans drew shocked responses from the locals, who for 2 millennia had regarded them as their own. Such is the power of trees to motivate human passions, both positive and negative. In Australia, even more than other countries, a nativist ideology that prevails in the conservation land management field views all naturalisations of exotic species as a form of biological pollution that should be eliminated. So-called conservation programs seek to cleanse the landscape of non-native trees using herbicide and machinery. Such is the power of trees to motivate human passions, both positive and negative. On the other hand, a growing number of ecologists are now recognising that novel ecosystems are part of nature's healing response to the impacts of human ignorance and exploitation. Trees are by far the most powerful agents and symbols of this regenerative power. Once energy descent reduces the potential to use machinery and herbicide on a large scale, the restorative power of trees will be appreciated as nature's abundance, whether those species are ancient inhabitants or recent migrants. This will be the power of trees in the energy descent future.